Hi, my name is Lily Clayton Hansen, and I'm the host of Nashville Conversations, a podcast and YouTube show based on my regionally best-selling book series, Word of Mouth Conversations. I'm super excited to be here today at the beautiful Ryman Artist Lofts in downtown Nashville with my guest, who I'm a huge fan of, Khalil Ekulona. Khalil is a journalist, he is a podcast host, and he is the former host of This is Nashville, which is honestly my favorite local podcast. So I'm just delighted to have him on the show today to talk about his award-winning journalism career and also any advice he has for budding journalists who might be looking to get into the field. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for having me, Lily.
So, love to know a little bit about your upbringing. I know it took several career paths to get to journalism, but how much was conversation a part of your upbringing? And, again, were your parents surprised that you ended up going to journalism as a career?
No, my folks weren't surprised. My dad, growing up in the suburbs of Baltimore, my dad worked for Maryland Public Television as an executive producer. He was a reporter. He's a screenwriter. He had always been involved in media. And my parents encouraged us to kind of get involved, and they put us out in front of people. If it's giving a speech, if it's giving a performance, they put us there. Growing up on set, I used to do some of the underwriting tags for certain children's shows for Maryland Public Television as an 8, 9, 10, and 11-year-old. I have sisters who are actresses. They threw us out there and they perform. And one thing that they would do is when we would go to see a performance, they made sure that we didn't pay attention to necessarily who the spotlight was on. Yes, we watched them, but we watched the entirety of a production. So if we could see backstage, what's going on backstage? And they would explain to us. So when we were backstage, we felt at home. Again, growing up on set, sometimes I watch television and television shows and movies, and I can imagine what the set looks like. So they gave us that background information. So if we were ever in those environments, we would feel very comfortable. And conversation is a part of my family legacy. I have a little tagline where I say a family where honor, integrity, and a well-timed joke are the only currency that matters. And we were expected to be able to engage in deep conversations with anyone, even at a young age. Point. If we were in trouble, you were going to get grounded. My parents, instead of grounding you immediately, they would ask you to plead your case and explain why you did said action or to try to talk your way out of it. Now, you weren't able to talk your way out of punishment or being grounded, but you were able to reduce the sentence, so to speak, if you made a cogent, logically sound argument for what you did. And I remember this from being a young kid, obviously, until I left the house. So.
Oh, wow. It was like being in debate class, like early on.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It was encouraged. Yes.
That's funny. Well, let's talk about some of your jobs prior to being a journalist. We had a really interesting conversation before the cameras started rolling, which was about all of the jobs that prepared you to be, a really savvy journalist. I know bartender, teacher. So I know that you encourage some of your mentees to, go to journalism school, yes, take it seriously, and then go do other stuff. Why is that? Why is that the advice you give them?
Because other skills, sometimes when people focus on a specialty, that's all they can think of. And what I like to say is these other skills, when I was a teacher, so to speak, being a teacher, one, taught me how to capture and hold an audience, because if you don't have classroom management skills, if you can't entertain those kids, it doesn't necessarily have to be fun, but you have to entertain in a way where you capture their attention. You're not going to teach diddly squat. You're going to deal with behavior problems. So it's capturing them there, learning how to ask important questions to get information out of them, but also learning to be a good listener, because a student or anyone sometimes will tell you more than the words that they're saying. It's the actions and how they say this, paying attention to their body language. So you can really key in on what's going on with them, particularly for students in their emotional state. But a lesson I would always tell my kids is whatever job you have, from being a dishwasher to working at the Gap, those are skills that you can apply to your life. If you work in restaurants and you're a dishwasher, well, should your kitchen be a mess? It's pretty easy to clean that up. If you work at the Gap, what does your closet and cupboard look like? You've learned
Oh, wow. I see
skills.
Motivational author is your next career.
Well, some people, it's funny. Some people say that, but it's like taking those. And that's something that I've taken in from being a teacher, from working in restaurants, being a bartender, working on film sets, working in call centers when I was young, looking for jobs and things, and being away. And also, call centers is a great thing because you're introduced to someone who's prepped to be annoyed with you from the minute you say hello. Now, it could be about getting the sale, but how are you going to address someone who can't see you? You're on the phone, a total stranger. How are you going to get to know more about them? And it's showing that genuine care for people in their humanity. Also, making music. I made music for quite a while when I lived in Los Angeles. That helped out a lot because of a creative way of go about interviews and producing segments, adding music to it, making it a full entertaining experience. It's anything you do will lead to it. So, when I tell journalism students is study this craft, but you will master the craft when you get out of the field and you can apply these skills to whatever else you're doing. Then you can come back. And I think they'll have more arrows in the quiver, so to speak.
Today's episode is sponsored by Freeman Webb, a trusted leader in multifamily and commercial property management. From stylish apartments to smart commercial spaces, they manage it all with care and compassion. Driven by a daily mission to provide exceptional service and build meaningful connections with everyone they encounter. Discover your next home or workspace at www.freemanwebb.com. I want to talk about your musical career because it was really interesting preparing for this. I've read everything I could about you, and there wasn't like a ton of stuff it would like kind of touch on occasionally like your career as like a hip hop artist, and then it would sort of occasionally mention that there might be like a reboot of or your original act, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Okay.
But just enlighten us to what your life was like when you were making hip hop music out on the West Coast.
Oh, wow. It was something. I graduated college with a degree in political science, decided I did not want to follow that path, and I wanted to follow my dreams, which was to make music and make movies. Moved out to Albuquerque very quickly, then moved out to Los Angeles. And it was just in my 20s, early 30s, going through making music. I was around the scene at the time when the Black Eyed Peas and Macy Gray were we already knew who they were because they were locally really excellent, but they kind of blew up on the national and global scene. Mm-hmm. And it was a time of living life. I decided to begin teaching during that time, which was difficult to try to chase a full-time music career and also try to be not only just a teacher in general, but an effective teacher. I did that for a while and I learned. Then I stepped away, still wanted to be involved with kids. So I substitute taught, but that was a chance for me I worked at my buddy's record store. Sometimes he could pay us in cash. Sometimes he could pay us in records, but we still did it. We were young at the time and it was just a wonderful environment of creativity and discovery. And out there in LA, much like it is here in Nashville, you're there for the art, but the industry and the business kind of creeps in. So it became a little bit intense. And after some time, after about 12 years there, I decided to leave because I found myself creating songs, but thinking about where they fit in the market rather than where they fit in the artistic space. And I didn't come out there to make things that fit in the market. I wanted to make art. And if that art happened to fit in the market, hey, that's icing on the cake. And so I decided to leave. It was time, but it was a wonderful, wonderful experience though.
Besides having the background to, interview, I guess, hip hop artists and producers more in depth, which I know you've done, multiple times on This Is Nashville. Does that bleed into at all how you interview or write? I'm just curious if your hip hop background has influenced your artistry at all as a journalist.
Well, if you listen to some of the segments that I've produced, I use music to help tell the story. I believe music is one of the most powerful, wonderful storytelling mediums. And if that song comes in, particularly if someone is familiar with it, that song that hits on the theme of whatever subject I was discussing in a piece, I feel like that hits a lot more. That hits so much harder, almost like the perfect song in a film score. Mm-hmm. The perfect licensed song. Wow, that really hits. I'm thinking just off the top of my head, the movie Malcolm X, when he's walking the scene before he's assassinated, the change going to come from, who's the artist? Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke's change gonna come. That was so powerful. You knew what this song of sorrow was about, and also you knew what was about to happen to the character. I like to use that. when I'm creating and crafting pieces. I know it's kind of against the norm and whatnot, but that's, anyone who knows me will understand that I tend to go, if everyone else is going right, I'm going to go left just off of nature.
I love that. Yeah. What's the theme song of like this, like a particular like news segment?
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. And it really helps. And sometimes you can even pair up a lyric with it that really helps tell that story and reach that emotional piece to us.
I love that. Kind of like sampling a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about your entree into hard news. Because, I obviously, and you mentioned this earlier in the conversation, you studied political science in college, but learning how to cover hard news, particularly when you're kind of getting just thrown into it, is an entirely different animal. So tell us a little bit about how you got your first job, as a podcast host, covering hard news in New Mexico. How did that even come about? And what went into, again, learning that specific genre of journalism?
Well, in 2013, I got my start in broadcasting, working with, it was a public access television show called The Morning Brew with longtime legendary radio host Larry Aarons out in Albuquerque. He retired. He wanted to come back and start doing television. And people kind of knew me as a guy who was connected in town with music. And so I came out and I was kind of the Friday music guy. Hey, this is the show you need to see this weekend. Next weekend, the Ramones are coming into town, so to speak. That led to an opportunity to work with Good Day New Mexico, NBC affiliate. We were morning magazine television. We came on after Kathy Lee and Hoda and right before Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Very few hard-hitting interviews there, but it was wonderful because I got to talk to a lot of celebrities, particularly on satellites, if they were promoting a film or a philanthropic effort of theirs, or even Arrow t-shirt, collared shirts. Celebrities, sports actors, actresses, comedians, and athletes. And
personalities, the big personalities of the world, yeah.
And regular local folks, too. So one thing I learned is when you're talking to a celebrity, they are pretty much have been asked every question you could think of.
Sure.
Particularly when they're doing these press junkets. You know how it is. They're sitting there for 6 hours and we're in Cleveland and next we're going to, Delaware and then back to Miami. They get bored. And I would find a relation point for some of them. I remember Coach Mike Krzyzewski, Duke legendary basketball coach. Rather than rattle off, he's the winningest coach in college basketball history. He's won 5 national championships. I gave his high school senior sports stats on the basketball team as a part of his intro. It threw him off. I could watch them on the monitor. They're like, what is this guy doing? Oh, wow. Okay. And they get into it. You're throwing them off and saying, yes, you're a highly accomplished person. I may even be a big fan, but you're a person just like me. I'm going to give you the honor and respect for what you've accomplished. And I found the same thing happened with politicians. They've been asked every question. Sometimes a politician's team will say, you have 15 minutes. And you ask that first question, and if it's a run-of-the-mill question or something that they've heard forever, they will take 10 minutes to answer. They will do this to fill up the time so they can get out of there to the next. I didn't allow them to do that. By, hey, how is it going? Before we get started, how are you? As if I was talking to an old friend. Suddenly, they're relaxed. And I didn't so when I got the job at KUNM, working for the NPR affiliate in Albuquerque, I told them, I'm a great host. I'm not a journalist. I haven't studied this. We'll teach you that. So they're teaching me some of the skills. Then the pandemic comes in 6 months later. I got that job in September of 2019. 6 months later, in comes the pandemic. And there we are creating this show. And suddenly I'm talking to politicians. They always noticed my team at the time and my other colleagues who were wonderful hard journalists. How are you able to get this out of the mayor? How are you able to get this out of the state representative? We cannot. But it's also sometimes it should be more of a cooperative relationship, but sometimes politicians and the media, it's a combative relationship to a sense. And so if you are the mayor and you see some of our journalists there, they're going to ask hard questions. Sometimes you'll take it in the press conference. Sometimes you won't. I was new. That benefited me, and I took an entirely different approach, a casual approach, not casual to the subject matter we were talking about, particularly during the pandemic when people were dying, when people were trying to figure out where their next meal was going to come from, when their unemployment check was going to come. But I took a casual approach in saying, I understand that you were doing the best you can in this job as a public official. So I'm going to give you that grace. But I also understand you're a public official. You asked for the job. Mm-hmm. They all asked for the job and voted. So I'm going to hold you to account for what you asked for and what you would promise to do for us. And I was able to kind of separate myself from constituent to a person working in the media, talking to them. But it just had an overwhelming essence and air of respect for the job, having understood maybe myself potentially going down that path to take that job, but also working with people who were in the public eye, who privacy is a very rare thing for them, and giving them that intimacy and space and trust. And that they responded in kind. And it got to the point where they were calling us up and, hey, can Khalil interview me? And whatnot.
Well, it sounds like you approached them, I mean, more along the lines of like an informed and, concerned civilian. I mean, rather than someone that was, trying to ask whatever question that was going to make them look poorly, like in front of their audience, I mean, you're not trying to trick them. I mean, you're just trying to get valid answers from people that can, be somewhat evasive.
Exactly. And it was a time where people wanted answers for very serious things. I learned a lot. I worked with a brilliant journalist. Her name is Marisa DeMarco. She was executive producer of the show. I was producer, host of the show. And it was basically the two of us putting all that together. We did get some assistance from our colleagues from time to time. And so we start this show in March. Around May, I'm like, it's so much. I'm like, whoa, so much was happening personally. So much was happening in the country, across the globe. And I said to her, wow, I'm a rookie in this journalism thing and I'm learning. This is pretty nuts. She said, you're not a rookie anymore. In the past couple months, you've had about 3 to 5 years experience. This is what it's like. Okay, let's go. And it taught me to push forward and to go. And there was no idea that was not too big for us to think of. And we also had a lot of freedom to go about it and develop the style in which we told stories and how we talked to people. Because I have to show, we had an episode where we talked to folks, it was in late April, who had already lost friends and family members to COVID. And that's something that I'll constantly remember because I'm talking to people who, as we're all trying to figure out what is this thing happening to us all, they're having to tell stories about how they had to on Zoom say goodbye to a loved one. Recognizing what that means to people and really sitting there with them. And I wasn't about to shed my humanity. And, sometimes we're taught as journalists and interviewers to be objective, but I didn't do that. I shared my humanity with them there. And I shared how grateful we were that they came on to tell that story at a time where they just could have been in their grief, but they wanted to let other people know of what was happening with them. And, there's been a lot of talk about the should we be objective as journalists? And I believe we should, but to a degree. We cannot throw our humanity aside. And that's something that I tend not to do. And people have been responding.
Did you always find it easy you're so good at speaking to people about, topics that can normally cause like a lot of disease or discomfort. I was listening to this really great, expose you did about sex trafficking in Middle Tennessee, which I knew very little about. And, just the way that you put this woman at ease, who was, kind of honestly having a breakdown during the interview. You were just very compassionate, but also like a rock, and so I guess did that always come naturally to you?
In many ways, yes. It was funny. Last week I was talking to my mom and she called and she sent, the team did a really wonderful, goodbye episode for me. And my mother got it and shared it with all the friends, people who watched me and saw me grow up. And one of my mom's friends from her childhood said, Khalil was always like that. And she told me a story of when my grandfather died. I was 9.5. And we were in New York City. And I was going around the house making sure that everyone was okay after the services. I don't remember this. But they said Khalil always did this. Khalil always made sure that people were okay. And navigating people and myself through difficult conversations, I guess that's a natural gift. I've got 5 siblings. I'm in the middle, so you're navigating and negotiating there in that setting with my friends, with students. Sometimes one of the schools I taught at in Los Angeles was a school for kids who got kicked out of high school. So I had kids from inner city Los Angeles. I had kids from Beverly Hills and Bel Air. I had a lot of kids whose families or themselves were kind of wrapped up in the gang culture, and the school's taking kids so they could be from rival neighborhoods. How do I negotiate that to make sure that nothing happens to these kids and they can look past those immediate differences and find their common humanity? Something we were talking earlier that a bartender does. You know, there's a lot of difficult conversations pop up at a bar, particularly when it's election season or something big happens politically. How can you hear everyone's point of view and then continue to guide the conversation? The spirits are involved. Tempers can get high. I didn't want to deal with any mess. So how can we have a fruitful conversation, particularly when people may not be sober or using their best judgment in times? And it's just kind of natural. And I really want people to get along. I want people to be good to each other. And whichever way I can best foster that, I try to.
Yes. Well, I think you're a natural peacekeeper, which makes sense if you're a middle child. I love that.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about This Is Nashville, because a couple of things that I found fascinating when I was doing some research on your background was that you and I actually, quite honestly, had a lot in common, which is why maybe I consider you like a kindred spirit to some degree. But
hey.
We both moved here really knowing almost no one. Both moved here to cover the city knowing very little about it. And we're both also very much embraced by the city. And so I would love to just talk about what sort of, thoughts, emotions you were going through when you got the job as the inaugural host of This Is Nashville, knowing that you were about to jump on a plane or drive here. I don't know how you got here, but cover a city that you had never really spent much time in before.
It was funny because...
Very brave.
Oh, thanks. I came out here in September of 2018. No, 2021. And it was exactly 30 years from college, entering college initially. And I thought, wow, 30 years ago, I was 18, going to college where I knew no one for a whole new life experience. And it was the same. I'm going to a city and I know no one as a grown man having all these experiences.
University of Lower Broadway.
That's right. I definitely did learn. I definitely did. I took some classes. Hopefully I passed. But what was interesting about it was, it was a fresh take. I'm leaving Albuquerque, a place that I have made home and had a robust community around me. And they sent me off proudly to come to this town and to establish something. And so one of the ways I got to learn and know the city was talking to people. There was a list of folks to call for potential senior producer candidates. First call I made was to a gentleman by the name of Willie Sims. People more commonly know him as Big Fella around the city. He's Nashville's unofficial mayor. We were on the phone for 5 minutes. And he said, I don't know if I'm going to get this job, but I know you and I are going to be friends. And we have been friends. And he's introduced me to folks. I got to meet former Mayor Megan Barry, who gave me a list of people to talk to. And that's wonderful to understand the history of the town, some of the policies of the town, the political history and machinations and how they're working and who's on this side, who's on that camp. It's important for people in our position to know. But I also wanted to know how Nashvillians felt. So I'm a football fan. It was football season. I would go to one bar consistently, but other ones, and sit and watch football and just talk to people about the town. Folks had no idea what I did for a long time. Just meeting people just for that. Some of my colleagues were like, why don't you tell them what you're doing? Because you can get this information. I'm like, if I tell them I'm with the news, some may stop talking to me and they'll couch their answers. Now I am finding out the honest truth about how they feel about this town. Had they lived here forever, born and raised here, or did they just move here? They're telling me honestly, without it being under the guise of talking to a journalist.
Do you remember what some of those consistent trends were from your conversations at, say, like the dive bar or the coffee shop in the early days?
A lot of them were how the town was becoming too expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And at the time, the big conversation was old Nashville versus new Nashville, seeing that and how the people who had lived here forever, how they're feeling about the precipitous change that the city had gone through. I mean, in the 4 years I've been here, I could see a huge change in it. Like the amount of people who are here and the conversations you're overhearing, again, coming from a family of 6 and having 5 siblings, I've learned sometimes how to sit and just listen to conversations. That was something that was taught to me when I was young and developed a skill as I got older. and you just sit in a bar or a coffee shop, minding your business. And you're not necessarily, as my students used to call it, ear hustling to figure out people's business, to get gossip. But, just sit and be quiet and you will hear where people were coming from. You will, and that was it. The affordability.
Professional eavesdropper.
Yeah. Losing the nature of the small town that is Nashville.
Sure.
And when I got out here, I was told Nashville is the last small town, or it's the smallest big city in the country. And it truly, truly is. It really is. Those were the big things. Affordability, housing, which continues to be an issue. Well,
I mentioned this to you before, we began our conversation. I would almost binge, listen to your episodes a lot of times, listen to 3 or 4 at once. And you would always cover stuff that, I would think, yes, these are real conversations that I'm having either with my friends or my clients or, my neighbors, colleagues, whomever. And one in particular that I really loved, where he really always held his feet to the fire. And I, admire you for this was, you did a whole episode with the mayor about affordable housing and how it's not affordable to live here anymore. And all these people that are the real culture makers in Nashville, who play on Lower Broadway and, are the reason that tourists want to come here in droves, can't even afford to live within the city limits. And that's why I'm so impassioned to film this, show at the Ryman Artist Lofts, which, for those of you that don't know, this is the city's residency dedicated solely to artists, and it's subsidized. And so it's very affordable. It's a third of market rate, and it makes it so that artists can live and work here and have a good, quality of life.
Yeah. Need more of that.
Yes,
more of that.
Exactly.
Because the trope of a talented kid, I moved out here and there's a young man I'd known since he was 12. He was 22. Wonderful musician, goes by the name of Kid Plastic. I'm out here for 6 months and he's like, I'm moving, uncle. I'm moving. I'm be there. I'm like, okay, I got your back, whatever you need. Now he's 22. So I'm like, let me know when you get here. Of course, 22-year-olds didn't. Mm-hmm. But I would reach out every once in a while. Like, I'm not going to be in your life and your business, but let me know I've got your back. If somebody's messing with you, I'm kind of borderline famous. And so you have help. But he left after a year. He said it was just too difficult to try to make it because that idea of a young, talented singer-songwriter or an artist in any medium, you used to be able to come out here with your guitar, your knapsack, your book of lyrics, and your dreams and find a way to attempt to make it work. Now you're going to spend half that time finding a way to attempt to find a place to live. And it's going to be further and further away from central Nashville. And a lot of your time is going to be spent on just trying to afford living in this city rather than coming up with the creative dream. So a little bit of what Nashville, projects out into the world about the opportunity here is not quite the reality, particularly for a lot of creative people.
Yes, no. I couldn't agree more. Let's talk about your conversations, because something that you did on the show, and I know this wasn't a segment that ended up continuing, I think, for the last year and a half or so, but you had this really great segment that I personally loved, which was the shotgun car interviews, where you would, and I don't even really quite understand how it worked, so maybe you can explain it, but it seemed as though you jumped in a car with someone and you guys were filming and recording, these interviews, literally while they're driving around the city. And they were with everyone, rodeo people, hip hop producers. So I would love to talk a little bit about the vision for the show from the beginning, maybe how it changed over time. And were there any segments, maybe suppose like that one, that didn't continue on that you missed?
Yes. Okay. So the show was that they hired an executive producer. They hired me, and then we found the rest of the team. And we started kind of building the show and tossing around ideas. And something that I do a lot, if I'm in a cab, if I'm in an Uber, I'm going to talk to my driver. Hey, how's it going? If I'm new to this town, keys. What neighborhoods are great? What neighborhoods should I be paying attention to? Tell me about the culture. How long have you lived here? Tell me about yourself. That's just who I am naturally. And so I thought that's a good way to learn. And it's a good way to roll in and incorporate regular Nashvillians and Middle Tennesseans. As you know, in the media space, sometimes the people who book up all the conversation are the highly accomplished or the politicians and the people of note.
Or the ones who can afford the good publicists.
Exactly.
Yes.
And what we wanted to do was open up an avenue. And that's something that we did from day one. It was a mission of the first executive producer of the show, a mission to have people who were normally not on the air and to talk to them. So we did do a lot of community outreach, community engagement to find them to be on the show. But I also wanted to know, a few things. My first time on Broadway, really, and the first riding shotgun was with a cab driver. I sat with this woman in her cab, and we took fares from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. on a Friday night in Broadway. And it was one of my favorites because we had laughs. She also got stiffed for $80 from a dude, and to find out how that is difficult for her. And if anybody's going to tell you how downtown Broadway works, not the tourist version, not the city come visit us version, it's going to be a cab driver, it's going to be a door guy, it's going to be a bartender.
Security guards, I'm telling you, they are your best friend if you are like an investigative journalist.
Yes, they are going to tell you how it really works. I wanted to get that. So yes, it was an interesting and wonderful segment, but that is... for me, again, giving me background information. So should I run into this situation again or run into someone who is talking about that? I have a history and an understanding, even though I had only been living there for a year. I have an understanding of the history that went back 5 years. We did certain things. Citizen Nashville is where we kind of reached out and tried to focus on some of the more, politically charged topics at the time. And we had some nice topics then. And then, about a year and a half into the show, we went through some leadership changes and I decided to loosen things up a lot more. My policy is if anyone in Nashville or Middle Tennessee is interested in it, it's worthy of a show. We got to find out enough to make it a show.
I love that you just said that because that was a question that I was like remiss I didn't write down, but you perfectly gave me a segue to ask, like, how the heck do you choose what you talk about on this show? There's like so many important like topics of conversation. I think it's just, it's such a masterful job at like really capturing the stuff, like I said, that like my like colleagues and I were chatting about.
We have a wonderful team of producers and the entire team gets together on Mondays to pitch. It could be from a conversation. It could be something from I read, something that we actually experienced. Hey, let's pitch this. We have a pitch form that people can fill out online and that comes into an automatic spreadsheet and we read from those, from answering emails, phone calls, text messages. We're open. All of us are open. Even the technical director and engineer is open. And anything that comes up, it's like, okay, let's set it out. And initially we would set our schedule 2 to 3 weeks in advance. I decided that when we made some changes, we should set the schedule a month in advance so we can look at it because the work on a daily show is incredibly exhausting. And everybody shows up and they give their best effort. But I'll be honest, sometimes if it's a topic that I'm really interested in, you're going to go that extra mile. You will lose that extra 2 to 3 hours of sleep to make sure that episode is as fulfilling as you would like it to be because it's a place of personal interest to you. I wanted to give our producers space for that. Some of the episodes that people have heard are because people on the team deeply care about that or they know someone who deeply cares about that. And we just wanted to open it up because sometimes I feel like opening up the variety, yes, you can get the most voices from the region in, but also when we do have a hard-hitting episode about sex trafficking or about a news topic, the Covenant shooting and what have you, people pay attention a lot more.
Absolutely.
They love the variety. They love discovery. They say, oh, these guys are focusing on politics. I'm going to pay attention because they're really hard hitting, focusing on this difficult topic. And they've become accustomed to how we approach those topics and the conversations we have around them, as opposed to it's constant hard news. It's constant. This is the most important thing of the week or the day. That's just not how people live life.
Did you have an episode where you thought, wow, we're really doing something amazing and special? We are giving normal, everyday people a chance to stand on their soapbox and let the voiceless have a voice.
When we opened up the phone lines on Thursdays, particularly with the Ask the Mayor series, asking Freddie O'Connell, he didn't have to come on, but once a month on Thursdays for over a year, he came on and took calls from the people. Now, I had questions for him as setup and also, fill in some space. But once those phone calls started rolling in, I'm just a conduit. I may ask a follow-up question if I felt the mayor didn't give a robust answer or what have you, or to help out the listener. But I feel like that because again, you can look at Nielsen numbers. You can look at all the data. You can look at your YouTube numbers. When people call or write in, you know exactly where they're at. I can look at a graph and determine, we're doing well with 18 to 34-year-olds. Yes, and that's wonderful and that's helpful. But you know what tells me really is when an 18 or 34-year-old calls up and tells us what they think. That, I know it's one person, but they're taking the time to do that. That to me is the real gold in how you can find out the pulse of an audience. So those episodes for sure.
Well, I was going to say, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. Like, I felt like your job with those excellent series with the mayor, I mean, which were some of my favorites, was really being a translator. I mean, yes, you were a conduit, but also like you were able to translate to someone that, I mean, you know, sorry, Mayor, but uses a lot of political jargon that's sometimes like very hard to understand for the normal person who's not like a news junkie. Mm-hmm. And I think again, just phrase it in a way where like, you know, people got it.
Yeah.
They got the issue.
Yeah. You got to explain. You got to explain to people and then be that translator. It's funny, real quick. I taught at a high school in LA for kids who got kicked out of high school. Mm-hmm. And the school was very adamant about their education, but the state was like, just have them pass this basic stuff and we'll move them on. And so for vocabulary, I'm looking at the words and I'm like, these are rudimentary. I'm not doing this. So I got GRE words for my students and I would have them. Fridays were exams and then fun, movies and stuff. Mondays, they would get this list and I'm like, okay, we're going old school. I know you think this is archaic, but we're doing this. I want you to copy out the definition by hand because I understood I had some kids who were visual learners, some kids who were kinesthetic learners, some kids who were auditory learners. And so I needed to reinforce and in every way that each one of my students learned. And so writing this out was for the kinesthetic learners to actually do it. Once they wrote out the definitions, I had them create a sentence with it. Most of them struggled with that. Then I had them turn this particular word, insipid, for instance, into slang that they used.
Oh my God, this is how I learned. I didn't even notice that kind of
turn it into slang that they used. Yeah. Okay. And then and they would ask why. I said, I want you to be able to translate between your college professor and your homeboy if you were all on the corner. You know, and therefore you can associate with those words. And again, being siblings, I've kind of always been this translator conduit person to help people come to understanding. My dad always says I should have been a diplomat. But
I love that.
In a way, I guess I am.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Well, let's talk about what Nashville taught you. Because again, I think the most interesting part about your story is you moved here, you kind of walked in cold. I mean, similar to myself. You know, I always tell people, I mentioned this in my TED Talk, you know, I probably moved here with a boyfriend, but we had like one friend when we moved here, you know, and then he and I broke up like several months later. And so it was like, you know, I kind of was like in like this crash course, like learning about a city and, you know, part of the country that I knew literally nothing about on my own. So what did Nashville teach you, not just about the culture here and the history, but about yourself as a person?
Real quick, that story about you coming here with your boyfriend and then being broken up several months later, that's a common story in Nashville. Happens a lot to people.
I've heard that.
Yes, very common. I'm like, oh, well, okay. And I guess that's just how life is. What I've learned about myself, wow, that's really deep, Lily.
Well, we're going there.
We're going there for sure. Okay. I'm still learning about myself. I've learned that I have more patience than I thought I did. And my parents used to call me Job. They're like, you have the patience of Job. What I learned is patience takes a lifetime to truly understand. That's why it's called patience. Patience with myself. Because it's, you know, as somebody who's in the public as well, you're in the public, you're out at this event, you're talking to people. Hey, how are you? A coffee shop. I hear that voice. We love the show. But patience with myself as far as when I was home alone, because I felt like I was truly able to be absolutely who I am when I'm home alone. Even if I'm at the grocery store, to a point, I'm still working.
Absolutely.
Representing the station, representing this thing that we've created with This Is Nashville. And so patience for myself, patience for my mistakes, understanding that I don't have to be perfect. I haven't figured it out. I've talked to brilliant people, genius level intellect in all of my career, particularly here in Nashville, who've done great things. No one has it all figured out. And so and if I have more patience with myself, I can have more patience with someone else, particularly someone who doesn't see politics the way I do. I also understood that life is a lot more than politics. Sometimes we can make it all about politics, but there's so much more happening in our lives. And politics change. The politics of 2025, very different from the politics in 1965. And that's 2025 is very different from 2085. Who am I being right now? in this moment. And I'm glad that I had this opportunity as a grown person who had a solid understanding of who he was when he came out there, so I can be, because I've discovered more about myself in this piece. So I'd say that patience and a deeper understanding of that, and being able to, I don't necessarily want to say forgive people for being slated, but understanding where folks are coming from. Again, I may not agree with the group you associate with, but let me understand someone's journey and path that led them to be a part of a group. That could be a troublesome group or it could be a wonderful group. We all have these stories. We all have these paths. We all have a decision to, if I turned left instead of turning right, if I caught that train on time rather than waiting 5 minutes, what happens different in life, And I have to give that up for people. If I'm going to use a common jargon self-care phrase, give grace to myself, I damn sure better be able to give it to others, no matter what they believe in, to see the humanity in it. Again, I don't have to agree. I don't have to agree with them. But how can I see the humanity and do that? Because it pays off. When I was in New Mexico during the protests, the George Floyd protests, there was a lot of traffic. A lot of people were driving down the streets. I'm on a signal. I'm listening to police scanners, but I'm also talking to colleagues on signal because we had some people out there covering the protest and we wanted to let them know, hey, this is where the police are moving. This is what's happening. There were a lot of self-appointed militia dudes who were there to protect property. There was an issue happening at a 7-Eleven on the corner. I get a knock on my door. It's a gentleman who's in the 3%ers and says, I've heard you. I know who you are. I've heard you. We need to help me settle this. Why did he feel free to come knock on my door during that tumultuous time? Well, the year before we were getting our roof and deck redone, he was on that crew. And I'd be, home from the bar, coffee in the morning, talking to him, and we talk about everything. He invited me down with his fellow 3%ers to protect the southern border of New Mexico. I refused, but we had robust conversations about politics and our views, morals, and values. They never once castigated each other. Didn't have to agree, but had robust conversations to where he trusted me at times where people were not trusting each other, particularly on those separate parts of the political spectrum. And we were able to quell any potential problems. That comes from trust. That comes from grace. That comes from being honest, not trying to necessarily change someone immediately, but having a relationship and an understanding. That's what it comes from. And I was able to, I think, maybe grow that out here. I didn't know what it was like coming to the South. When the job came up on my radar, I thought Nashville, wow, it's like hee-haw. I don't know. And my mentor.
It's a little hee-haw.
Yeah, and my mentor was like, nope, Nashville's like Austin. It's on its way up. You need to seriously consider this. You need to seriously consider it. And I did. Came out. I applied. They flew me out for an interview and I kind of stood around in the airport in the middle of the sun to get the feel of it, watching all of these people, sea of people, tourists and locals back and forth, just to see how my body felt. How did my spirit feel being here? And it was like, yeah, come here. You're going to learn a lot. And I'm not done learning. I don't think any of us are done learning until we take our last breath. So it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love everything you're saying. I mean, I felt like your affinity for tolerant discussions bled through on every single show, particularly with the discussions with the mayor. I mean, where you would always say, before you picked up the phone line, let's make sure we are going to, yes, be honest, but be respectful first and foremost. And I just thought that was so cool. I mean, you didn't have like a clever tagline, I think, for it, but I mean, you said kind of the same thing verbatim every time. And I just thought it was just like really, really touching because it's like, yes, even though this is a political leader and this is someone that you might have some anger towards, it's like, we're going to get nowhere if you are being, abrasive.
Yes. And we're used to that. And it's the expression of people's passions, their frustrations, their hopes and their dreams and what is going on with them. But understand that the person you are talking to, who may be the subject of your admiration or your ire, is a human being too. Mm-hmm. And it's like, when I come to understand it with my own folks, particularly talking to my teenage students about, upset with their parents. I'm like, your parents are doing the best they know how. And that's how I think most people attempt to do things, doing the best they know how. None of us are perfect. So I can't expect perfection from anyone. But what I can expect is an honoring of each other's humanity, or we need to continue that. And I also wanted to set that example. And I think because of that, of saying that same thing verbatim, and because of setting that in other conversations, when people called, particularly election week of 2024, we opened up the phones all week, able to have very intense, honest, and respectful conversations around the topic. And that's something that I was showered with wonderful compliments from folks who live far outside of Nashville, but in our listening radius, who said, young man, we appreciate that you led conversations with that. You know, these are people who vote differently than I think the normal NPR listener do, but they engaged in the conversations because they were always the foundation was respect for each other.
I love that they called you young man and they call me ma'am, which I always think, I am not a ma'am. I'm too young to be a ma'am.
That's right. That's
Give me
right.
a break. Twisted. Well, let's talk about some of the most fun moments on the show, because we know that you made an absolute impact on the city as far as, I mean, it's the tagline to your show, be good to each other. I mean, I love that, which we can definitely get into where that came about, because I mean, even the mayor would quote that tagline. It was so wonderful. But what were some of the most fun, exciting, I can't believe that I'm actually doing this interviews that you did during the show? Because I would imagine, I mean, you're doing, upwards of 5 interviews a show. You're doing 4 to 5 shows a week. I mean, sometimes it must just be like an absolute blur, but which ones stand out?
It does feel like a blur. Some of my favorites were, well, some of them haven't been aired yet. I don't know when this is airing. But coming up soon for people, we have Amy Grant, which was absolutely wonderful to talk to her. I talked to Pat Boone, the legendary Pat Boone. And people are always saying, why are you talking to Pat Boone? And I'm like, first of all, Pat Boone has been famous since my parents were 10 years old. Everyone, a couple summers ago, last summer, the argument was Drake or Kendrick Lamar. Well, back in the day, it was Pat Boone or Elvis. I love talking to famous folks because they've led an entirely different life than most of us. But they have wisdom. And he's 90 years old. And I'm down to talk, because if I'm lucky, I make it to 90.
I have one of his records sitting right over there.
Okay. Yeah. If I'm lucky, I make it to 90. What have you learned about life, sir? What wisdom are you going to give us? And that's how I approach everyone, even from young ones to old ones. Everybody's got some wisdom that they can get. And selfishly, what wisdom can I pick up on that I can improve and add to my own life? So Pat Boone was a lot of fun. Larry Gatlin was a lot of fun. Another legendary singer, songwriter, and performer. Larry Gatlin was in studio, and this man at 73 has so much energy and vitality. I thought he was going to challenge me to push-ups on there. I was like, whoa, what is this? That was a lot of fun. Anytime we talk to students, we had a series where we're like kids in action, and just what's going on with kids these days. Their parents weren't a part of the interview at all. Talking to them. I talked to elementary school students in one segment, middle school, and then high school. It was so much fun because it kind of made me feel like I was back in the classroom again. And getting something out of a kid is a lot harder than getting something out of a politician. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. Yes. I love that. And I know that you interviewed, some really amazing, historic, figures like the freedom fighters.
The freedom fighters. They were wonderful.
Were you like a real history junkie before?
To a degree.
Okay.
To a degree. I knew who they were, and I knew about what they did from what my parents taught my siblings and I, and from some courses in school, but to sit with them.
Sure.
One, it's an honor to sit with them, but it was also the realization that what they did was not too long ago. Learning about the city. One of the first things I covered was going down to Fort Negley, learning about that, talking to Betsy Phillips about her book, Dynamite in Nashville, and a hidden history that's here. There's Albert Bender with the Native American Alliance, learning about the Native American influence and what this region used to be. Because think about it. There are roads you can walk. Part of my commute for a section, it was the Trail of Tears. And coming from New Mexico, I would tell this to friends and they're like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of American history happened right here. Does westward expansion happen in that way? Mm-hmm. And I know that was horrific, but look at what happened. And coming to have a balance. So those were a lot of fun. Anytime I got to do hip hop stuff, I love it. Yeah, it was just absolutely fantastic and fun. We've had comedy shows with comedians where it's like, just come on and make us laugh because we all need a laugh. from time to time.
Although they're dark sometimes. Like I've been good friends with stand-up comedians. It's like they have a dark side.
Yeah, they do. They cleaned it up enough for our airwaves, but that was a lot of fun. I'm really trying to think. We did a crazy Halloween episode, a very crazy Halloween episode, that got mostly good reviews and a good reception. Some people didn't necessarily get it at all, but that's something I was very, very proud of, because we just were like, we're on public radio. Let's do something weird. And it's interesting because before I got here, NPR was celebrating 50 years, and we were listening. I was in New Mexico listening to like some of the stuff NPR had on the airwaves at first, before it was so news and conversation focused. They would have things like radio plays and stuff. And I felt, we're in Music City, this city of creatives. We should do things like that. Let's get up with TPAC or a dramatic place, pardon me, and put something together. Never quite developed, but a former producer for the show said, Khalil, I want to do something interesting for Halloween this year. She ran the idea by me, and I said, okay, let's get in. And the fact that we decided to take this tongue-in-cheek, comedic, but 1970s style blaxploitation-ish approach to Halloween in Nashville, and basically asking Black people, where's the scariest place in Nashville for Black people? But we got so many people involved, like Mayor Megan Barry, former Mayor Megan Barry, Leland Statham from News Channel 5, Juvenile Court Judge Sheila Calloway, comedian Josh Black. All of these folks got in. They're like, oh, this idea is crazy. You guys are crazy. Let's go. And we did it. And we stayed up till 3, 4 in the morning the night before on October 30th to get this thing done and have it go out. It was like, I rarely listen to episodes, That's something that I go back to every once in a while, because it's just a joy. I felt like I was watching something, as I was listening.
That's interesting. That's like asking a writer if they like read their own work, or an actor if they watch like their own like films. Like I never like thought to ask you that, but like, do you listen to yourself like on the radio?
Very rare. If I get in the car or something and it's on, yes. When I was in New Mexico, the show was once a week, and I'm working at home, but I'm working every day. The only time I really had off was the show aired at 11. We would make sure at 10 on Sundays that it was loaded and it was going to play. Once then, we could relax and take time off. I didn't want to listen to it. I spent all week making it, but my housemates wanted to listen. I'm like, guys, can you please not? They're like, you don't understand. We need this. We need to hear this show. Wanted to be informed and stuff. I'm like, you live with me. I've been telling you this stuff. They're like, no. We needed this experience. So I got used to listening to myself then, or I would just take a walk for an hour and then come back, because it's something about separating yourself. But then going through and listening, it's, I'm sure you may experience this when you could go back to something that you created, but almost temporarily forget that you were a part of it. And rather than be the creator who's observing this, experiencing this with a little bit of a critical eye, because, I could have tightened that up a little bit better, or that was really well done, almost as someone unattached. And so I'm hearing it as a listener for the first time. That was helpful at occasions.
And could you enjoy it?
Yes. That was the best place. That's the best way to enjoy it.
Yeah. That's awesome. Finding inner peace. I love that.
Yes.
Well, last question. We live in a world that feels so fast, overwhelming. I must say, honestly, when it comes to like technology, I feel like I'm always like 100 steps behind, honestly.
Tell me about it.
You're in an industry, like every industry these days, that, is, I guess, at risk of changing due to stuff like AI. But on the brighter side, how much more important do you think, in this world where technology is at the forefront of everything, connection and the ability to just have a conversation just like this and listen to each other is going to become? Because I have faith in humanity that I think that as technology takes over and AI takes all of our jobs, that people that can just sit around and shoot the S are going to become more powerful than ever.
Yes, I really agree with that. High five, because we had an episode with earlier this year. There's a group called Folks Table, and it's about.
Oh, I just went to one the other night.
Yeah, they're wonderful.
Yes,
absolutely wonderful. You get to meet strangers.
Yeah,
you sit there, you meet strangers, either coffee, happy hour, or dinner. They have wonderful ice-breaking games, but you get to meet people And you're talking.
I loved it. I honestly did. They are geniuses. It's so great.
It's not about your phone. It's not about being in this hip place. It's not about being seen as a participant in the cool thing. It's about being seen for who you are.
Yes.
And not feeling shy about letting people know who you are and what you believe. That was a wonderful episode. And I think things like that are going to happen a lot more. People are going to value that a lot more. Yeah, technology is here. Now, I've got interesting theories on AI that I'll share at another time. But the tech is here. Is the tech coming for our jobs? I don't know if AI can do our jobs and not give people the connection that we have been able to create and give to our audiences. AI can give you a summary of a conversation. AI can give you a transcript, or they can crank out news in AP format and style, but it's losing that nuanced heart and soul. At this moment, it's there. So I feel like our jobs are safe for the moment. But technology is coming in. It's supposed to make everything so easy for us. Well, conversations aren't necessarily easy for us these days.
I knew I loved this guy.
You know?
Honestly, you were like ringing every bell, because also I was going to say to you, what I sincerely believe, and I had this conversation with someone the other day who worked in marketing, was they said no one cares about expertise anymore. And I was like, au contraire. I mean, when I listen to someone like yourself, you are a master at the art of the interview, and it's very clear. And it's like, you cannot, take someone who has had a podcast and done 10 episodes and say that they are a master in comparison to someone that has done thousands of them. It's just not true. It's like, I have interviewed renowned people in London for the ebook I did on London, and it's like, these people have studied psychology, the royal family, jewelry design, you name it, their entire lives. Mm-hmm. So yes, I don't believe that AI is ever going to take away the, not even just the cachet, but what it means to have an area of expertise.
Yeah. Okay, so have you ever seen the film Hiro Dreams of Sushi?
Yeah.
It's about a gentleman. I saw it years ago. I don't know if he's still alive. A gentleman from Japan who had one of the most renowned sushi restaurants in Japan. It was in a subway station. And he had learned, he was 80 years old. He started studying sushi, the art of making sushi, at 10. And that's all he did. And I forget the philosophy that's there. It's a Japanese philosophy that's, you work on one thing forever, and that's how you become the master. My sister showed it to me, and it was this idea, because it was also growing, and I was going through this thing of hustle culture. You have to be involved in so many different things to be all over the place, and we see how that's drained folks, and folks are kind of falling off. Mm-hmm. It's like, whoa, maybe focus on one thing. Hence, when I talk to my mentees, I'm like, yes, do what you're going to do. Get your degrees, but then leave and do one thing and one thing only. And learn that, and the patience of that, and the mastery of that. And what AI is not going to give us, one, is that mastery and that nuanced thing, No,
because it encourages this culture of just skimming the surface.
Being homogenous, and that's not who we are. If people are going to understand, they talk about diversity, and they think of diversity in terms of racial, gender diversity, maybe some spiritual, religious diversity. It's the diversity of humans. We're all together. We're in a diverse situation. And I love to talk to people who've highly accomplished. But again, regular folks have wisdom, have stories to tell. When I was a young man living in Los Angeles, I took the bus for most of my travels there. I talked to so many folks, and I learned so much wisdom from old folks that I never saw again, just because we sat on the bus for a half hour or at the bus stop for an hour having a wonderful conversation. These are regular folks who give us that. And AI is not going to be able to replace that. Technology is going to make it easier for us to do some things, but when I hear stories of how the reporters back in the 90s even had to deliver stories to WPLN, you find a payphone, you get the clips, you screw it off, all of these steps that they had to do. And we think of now, wow, with technology, how were you able to do that? I don't know if I could, but they still did. They still got it done. Technology makes things easier for us. Sometimes use the technology, but maybe not. Take on this project. Take it the old school way, because necessity breeds innovation. That's how you can come up with something new.
Well, bravo. Well, I can't thank you enough. On that note, I don't think we could have a better conversation, honestly. It was such a delight to meet you. I know that Nashville will just miss having your lovely voice in our ear all of the time, but I can't wait to see what great things you do next. So anything on the horizon we should look out for?
Right now, a lot of rest and relaxation and reflection on what has happened. But there are a couple podcast ideas that I'm working on and seeing what's up. I'm going to let spirit drive me in making the final decision about what I do next.
Sounds good. If you see him meditating at your local coffee shop, don't be afraid to say hello. Thank you so much, friend.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really a blast.